Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Really glad you could join us here. My name is Andrew Waber. I'm the Director of Insights over here at Teikametrics and joined today by Ryan Walker, Senior Director of Client Strategy. And really excited to talk through this with you. Got a lot of great research around what happened over again this week when it was Prime Day and kind of some good stats. Really, as you get warmed up for Q4, the latter part of Q4, Cyber Week, etc. So I know folks are still coming in, so we'll give them a minute. But just while we're waiting, just a few housekeeping notes to be aware of. You will get a recording of this webinar along with the slide deck. This will be coming out. You'll get this kind of early-ish on Monday, so just keep an eye out for that. And we'll be taking questions at the end. So at any time during the presentation, question comes up, you don't have to wait till the end. You can literally go to that question box again on the right-hand side of your screen, enter it right there, and we'll again get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So with that, we can kind of just get started here. So here's what we're going to be covering today. First, what we're going to be covering is how advertising performance on Prime Day kind of varied by vertical, and along with insights kind of on how Amazon private label brands fared over the holiday. Additionally, then kind of Ryan's going to go into, when we talk about on the ground realities, what were the observations kind of from a seller brand owner perspective over the course of the sales event. Obviously a lot went on. That's obviously very different than what the traditional Prime Day is, middle of July, but what were some of the takeaways there? And finally, kind of thinking about, again, as we're moving forward, we're moving into closer to Cyber Week, obviously like the key holiday shopping season. Obviously, we all know like the larger macroeconomic trends around COVID's impact on the overall shopping landscape, e-commerce landscape. How are those manifesting themselves within the stats that we saw, and what may be some indications in terms of this upcoming holiday season. So we'll cover that, and then again, we'll get to Q&A at the end of the presentation. So first, I want to go over the data that we're going to talk about today and some notes on the methodology. So this, when we talk about ad performance data, which you'll see in here, that's drawn across Teikametrics' entire client base. So just be aware of that. And specifically, when we look at these comparisons, we're comparing the Prime Day period, so that 2-day period, looking at that daily average versus the daily average in the prior 2 weeks. So you can kind of see again what is a quote unquote average day like, and then what was Prime Day like, right? So we were trying to provide that comparison. And then when we talk about Amazon private label data, we captured that roughly over a week. So we looked at from the 6th of October all the way through the 14th, the end of Prime Day. And what we were doing was we were looking at the search data. So we're looking across the top 1 million search terms on Amazon. And for those Amazon private label products that showed up somewhere on those SERPs. So right, of the top million, some private labels maybe didn't show up there, and in that case we didn't see them. And additionally, I would note that everything we looked at was again relating to the search page. So anything that, let's say, happened with Amazon private label outside the search page, which in the case, maybe they had a spot on Amazon's homepage, that's not necessarily captured here. So that would warrant further study, but just we're looking specifically at kind of where Amazon private label is showing up from a search results perspective. So let's get right into it. So let's look at, again, a performance metric. Let's look at search volume, and we're looking at it kind of from a volume perspective across verticals. What were the differences? And really what you see here is that across the board, again, looking at kind of the daily average versus the prior 2-week average, really across the board, with the very slight exception of patio, lawn, and garden, you saw very large, pretty substantial increases in terms of just volume of search activity. And as you'd expect, kind of the verticals that seem to have the largest increases are things that you would typically associate with Prime Day with kind of like looking for deals, right? Deal seeking, which is kind of a big aspect of Prime Day. Electronics, cell phones and accessories, toys and games, right? And then you see some additional search boost across some other other verticals. So keep in mind what really this shows is you could argue this is similar to what you've possibly seen in other Prime Days, right? Where it's these type of categories, people come to Prime Day expecting to see these type of deals, and that's really where the bulk of the opportunity is. However, that all these people coming to Amazon, maybe for deal seeking, or a lot of them coming, right? All that activity then bleeds out into other areas of Amazon that maybe aren't as directly related to traditional deal seeking. So kind of interesting to see this here. And okay, so how did this, from an advertising perspective, how did this morph into kind of a CPC change? So what you see here, again, the CPCs went up just about across the board, again, with the exception of patio, lawn and garden. We saw them drop slightly, just by single-digit percentage points. But you did see CPCs kind of rise across, most of the categories you looked at here, and in some cases substantially. And we'll talk about this later, but a lot of these CPC changes are justified in terms of you as a brand wanting to still stay in the game. That these increased costs are essentially offset by, and we'll talk about this later, increases in downstream activity when it comes to conversion rate, et cetera. So we'll be talking about that, but basically, like, this was, while these ad costs went up, you saw that return on the back end, which made this worthwhile. But just when we think about going forward, these should be setting your expectations a little bit, because when you see these high traffic events, the increase in activity that we talked about, it's essentially the increase in competition from your fellow advertisers, essentially it ratchets up that much more, so it doesn't offset that increase in activity, essentially, right? The demand for advertising outpaces that increase in supply of clicks, if you were.
Andrew, okay, so it's interesting.
Yeah, go for it.
Just to compare the change in CPC to the change in search volume, like you see beauty and personal care get a lot more expensive despite proportionally a smaller increase than increase in search volume than something like cell phones or electronics. Whereas cell phones and electronics have proportionally smaller increases in CPC compared to their search volume. It could mean there's opportunity to capture more demand there for events like this in the future. I would imagine a lot of that CPC growth is kind of dampened by just not having more margin to invest in advertising, or investing that margin into other things like deals or promotions rather than CPC. But it's, I think, kind of telling to compare the CPC change to the search volume change, and where there are those divergences in that change. So I just was interested to see that here.
Yeah, and definitely, each of these verticals has its own market dynamic. So we're talking about these kind of, yes, they're all part of Amazon, but yeah, right. I mean, as you talked about, right, it's like each of these, when you talk about margins, let's say within that cell phones and accessory space, a lot of those folks are operating on very tight margins, and kind of markets that you could argue, in the case of, let's say, cases, that type of thing, that are becoming largely commoditized. So, the fact that you didn't see that CPC rise, close to as much, right? It could be due to these other factors outside of, just traditional supply and demand constructs. So, yeah, definitely something that kind of you listeners on the line, keep in mind. These, again, set expectations and understand, right? These reflect some of the market realities that you're seeing within your own category. Right? There's some of that that's going to bleed in here as well. Okay, so private label, this is obviously, a big bugaboo that a lot of people talk about is how is this manifesting itself on Amazon, the private label aspect of Amazon's business. And, probably to no one's surprise, right, where Amazon was really leaning on to drive volume here was discounts. So again, this is across several thousand Amazon products that we looked specifically at their kind of price changes. And you did see kind of, again, not every product was discounted, but a good, very healthy percentage were. And of those products that were discounted, you saw the average discount, again, from the kind of weekly price average leading into Prime Day, was discounted an average of 14%. Now, there was a wide range here. You saw some products from Amazon discounted as much as 70-some%, again, and all the way down. But, this was the average. So this can be, again, when you think about your own plans potentially around discounting when you get into Cyber Week. Just beware, this is at least what Amazon was doing kind of in aggregate over the course of Prime Day, and you can take that into your decision making here. Now, another thing that a lot of people talk about with Amazon private label is their presence within the search page, and is really what was interesting, I think, as we went through this exercise, is that when you look at the presence of these brands, and these are subset, it's not every Amazon private label. We pulled all of them, but kind of for the sake of simplicity, we kind of took some of the most popular and put them into this graph. But this was across all of them. You really saw a similar trend, which was generally their overall exposure on the search page remained largely flat. And this was in the case of both sponsored placements and total placements, which we'll go through next. And in the case of, some of them here, I mean, you see a very slight rise, let's say with May here, but a slight drop even with Salima, but essentially you're seeing largely kind of flattening presence. And this is kind of, again, what this is showing is how often are Amazon private label products from these private label brands showing up on the page one across the top million search terms on Amazon. So again, largely flat, and in some cases declining a little bit. Tuft & Needle is kind of an odd case, just because they really make one product, which is a mattress. So the universe there is a little small, but kind of interesting there. And again, total placements, when you look, this is organic and sponsored together, very flat, right? You don't see much movement here at all, especially when you get into Prime Day. So again, keep this in mind. Basically, what we're seeing, at least with the data here, and at least when it comes to Prime Day, that where Amazon private label was prior to this event, they kind of were in the same place generally during the event as well. Again, and this is just relating to the SERP. So we're not thinking about those homepage placements, which obviously those are going to drive volume if and when Amazon decides to do this. But at least on the SERP, we're seeing a lot of kind of flat presence here, just in terms of Amazon. And what's very interesting here is, okay, maybe the question you were asking, let's say on the previous graph, so as well, okay, maybe they're showing up just as often on the page one, but maybe they're moving up in the SERP, right? Are they taking their listings and essentially they're moving into the top 5 as one example? So we looked at this, we said, okay, how often were Amazon private label products getting into those top 5, and this is overall, top 5 placements on the SERP across the top million terms? And again, you kind of see largely flat, right? The rate at which those products showed up in the top 5, it did vary slightly, but I mean, you're not, in aggregate, you're basically seeing, again, flattening of this. So basically, the expectation you should take away from this is, at least again during these sale events, we did not see Amazon as a whole kind of take their private label products and kind of really push them to the top of the SERP in aggregate. And this, right, the case may be that, right, maybe on a keyword that mattered for you potentially, that may have occurred. Obviously, there's going to be cases here, but again, across kind of the universe here, we're seeing a largely kind of flat presence here. And this is true with that was sponsored, organic, you see largely the same trend. And in fact, what's interesting with essentials, you actually see it decrease a little bit, which is interesting. But again, across each of these brands, not much movement. Now, this is something that we're going to obviously keep an eye on it, going through Cyber Week as well. But it was surprising to me to kind of see this largely flat growth. And I think for you as as sellers and brand owners, yes, okay, you may be worried about Amazon private label for your own business, like of course, but at least when we're looking at what they're doing on the SERP, there's a little more steadiness here that while there are a lot of headlines about potentially what Amazon's doing, you're seeing them, at least again on the SERP, not doing a ton of wild moves where you're seeing a lot of this stuff on a brand by brand basis move a lot. So that was something interesting that I think we saw coming out of this. Okay, so now let's get into kind of takeaways for you guys as sellers, really what you should be kind of thinking about as we kind of move in. So Ryan, I'm going to hand it off to you, kind of talking about this.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so Prime Day is always an exciting time to participate in the advertising world on Amazon. You get a ton of activity. and there are a ton of sales that follow. So as long as your strategy going into it is sound, you're generally going to have the successful couple of days. And we saw pretty much as expected some almost graph-breaking levels of activity, dramatic increases basically across every key metric on the advertising side, as well as on the total sales side, as we would generally expect for Prime Day. So impressions were up by over 100% compared to a prior period. Clicks up over 100% compared to a prior period. Conversion rates are dramatically up, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But just as we would always expect to see on Prime Day, this year was a dramatic divergence from the prior 2-week period. And I guess there were some questions as to, was this year's Prime Day going to be the same as prior years, given the change in date? And I think it's pretty safe to say that the effect Prime Day has on consumer behavior in terms of interest coming to the site to search for products and then convert on those products really didn't change given the time of year. What they bought, that may have changed, and I think we'll chat through that in a little bit. But in terms of overall levels of activity, it increased by stunningly almost the same exact percentages as we saw last year. So just as an example, last year Prime Day, the 14-day period leading up to Prime Day compared to the 2 days of Prime Day, we saw 156% change in impressions. Same exact percentage this year. Now clicks and sales and all of that's going to change a little bit, but literally the change to like the decimal was identical, which really just suggests to me that the amount of consumer interest didn't change given the change in time period. Andrew, if you want to jump to the next slide. What was most interesting to me is the changes we saw in conversion behavior. So search behavior, seeing that it's exactly the same as last year, that's good to know. But the results of that search behavior, I think, is perhaps more telling that maybe something was a little bit different this year. So the conversion rate change that we saw this year compared to the conversion rate change that we saw in 2019's version of Prime Day was dramatically different. So if we compare, again, the 2-week period leading up to Prime Day in 2019 to the 2 days of Prime Day in 2019, the conversion rate change in that time period was, let me make sure I get the right metric. Actually, you've got it right here. It was 7%. So we saw a 7% increase in conversion rate in 2019. And then for 2020, that jumps up to 18%. So you basically have 2.5 times larger or more of a change on the conversion rate in Prime Day this year compared to last year. So even though impression volume was the same for every impression that you serve, there was potentially more value to extract out of that advertising auction, which I think is pretty. It's a pretty incredible change, and I think there are some interesting theories that one could argue might be driving that. But this was a pretty stunning result for me, especially when you consider that we don't even have full attribution at this point. So we still have, I think, 4 or 5 days left before your 7-day attribution is fully complete for Prime Day. So we should actually just expect these numbers to continue to grow and that gap to continue to extend. So really stunning numbers on the conversion rate change.
Yeah, and I think this emphasizes, Ryan, like what we were talking about earlier, was we saw those CPCs go up, but right, those rates that they had increased kind of was similar, right, as you talked about, to kind of like last year, right, when you see those increases. Meanwhile, though, right, this downstream, metric and conversion rate, which is obviously what everyone's shooting for, that increased like pretty substantially compared to what that boost you saw last year. So again, that traffic is, you could argue, even more valuable now than it was a year ago. And just because those folks are converting at a higher rate, so more than kind of making up for that increase. So just this was definitely interesting to see.
It absolutely is. So on my side of the business, I saw CPCs across the board go up by about 20%. whereas in 2019 they went up by about 15%. So there's definitely change and growth there, but that percentage change is a lot smaller than this 7 to 18% jump on the conversion rate side. So like the value of each of those clicks, even though you're paying more to get them, is dramatically higher.
Yeah.
So with that, I think it's clear that from a conversion perspective, Prime Day 2020 was more impressive than Prime Day 2019, even with the change in time period. Something that I didn't share in the previous two graphs, but I think was really interesting is we saw a similarly large increase in average order size across a lot of our clients as we saw on conversion rate. So from the prior period leading up to Prime Day in 2019, I think AOVs jumped up by about 16%. For 2020, that turns out to be 48%. So you get this enormous change in average order size going into Prime Day, but that effect is amplified even further this year. And I think that probably indicates to me, and I think ties into the conversion rate difference 2019 to 2020, suggesting that people might be starting their holiday shopping right now. And rather than waiting until Black Friday to start holiday shopping, it started 2 days ago, 3 days ago. And this is the beginning of the holiday shopping season. And people are starting to fill their carts with gifts that they're going to go under the tree for the holidays, or be shared with their friends and family throughout the holidays. So it's, I think, a large enough change that we have to assume that something was different with the way consumers were thinking. And the best theory I can come up with is it's probably people starting to do that holiday shopping right now.
Yeah, I think Ryan, like what you're talking about is, it makes sense to me, because right, you're going to have those still the same kind of deal hunters that are coming to Prime Day because it's like, okay, I'm getting okay, I can get a new TV for a really significant percentage off, right? All the deals that people come to expect. But then outside of those folks, right, yeah, you had this additional group of folks that maybe came to Prime Day with just a different purchase decision making process in mind, right? They were at least thinking about gift giving, because this was later, right? That's a valid theory, I think, is like in terms of, okay, well, this was pushed obviously from July when most consumers are not shopping for holidays in July, to October. And then, so it just changed, I think, the nature of, right, this kind of secondary portion of Prime Day, where, outside of the core deals that people might come to Prime Day for, what else are they doing? And, this really showed that, right, maybe pushing Prime Day later, in this case, right, drove some of that, different behavior, which I think, makes as much sense as kind of like other theories that could be out there. I think it seems to be at least a pretty heavy contributor.
Absolutely. And I guess if you take both of these large changes in conversion rate and AOV into consideration and combine them, like any change in CPC is probably justified. So I really wouldn't worry at all about that change in bid or CPC that we may have seen over the 2 days of Prime Day, because the conversions and the increased order sizes more than made up for it. I would caution people to be careful to not maintain those same bids after the holidays, and to make sure that you're adjusting, after Prime Day, and make sure you're adjusting your strategies based on what you think conversion rates and average order sizes are going to return to. But in terms of value, we probably should have increased CPCs even more based on what we were seeing in value in the marketplace. So I think a takeaway for next year is, if they keep it at the same point in time, it probably makes sense to be even more aggressive next time around. Andrew, if you want to jump to the next slide, I do want to talk through how advertisers can make sure they're prepared to, cool off or ramp down from Prime Day a little bit. So, if you're using Flywheel and you adjusted max for Prime Day, make sure you revert targets back to their prior values or their original values now. You really should have only needed to do this if you wanted to be way more aggressive than you would typically be, or if you were trying to conserve budgets in some way and didn't want to overspend. with our hourly bidding and our methodology to take into consideration prior year data and day of week trends, we did a lot of the adjustments for you in terms of estimating what the conversion rate change would be. So there shouldn't have been a lot of preparation that you needed to do here, but if you did make any max changes, definitely make sure you go back and set those to their prior values now. Monitor your spend closely for the next couple of days. Be careful that you're not overspending against your budget. People are going to continue to shop, and I would expect that conversion rates are going to actually decrease compared to like a non-Prime Day average. So if we look at 2019 data, we find that conversion rates actually come down about 13% compared to the 2 weeks prior to Prime Day. So I would expect roughly a similar trend to happen this year. So make sure you're careful with how your campaigns are spending and performing over the next couple of days. And I would just emphasize that max should be the primary constraint for bids. It's much easier and more effective to manage your spend through max than capping out. So if you're capping out with your budget, you're basically still spending at the same rate. You may be harming your performance by capping out too early in the day if you're just relying on a budget cap. So definitely use max rather than budgets where you can. I understand that's not always possible. Got a budget you need to stick to, change the budget. But max is usually your better option. And then finally, just consider DSP to feed your top of funnel with all those users that engaged with your brand over Prime Day, and start to prime them to purchase over Cyber Week. So use that DSP as a re-engagement and an upper funnel acquisition strategy to start to build your audience up to take advantage of Cyber Week and the rest of the holiday shopping season that's coming up.
Yeah, and I guess to jump on that a little bit, yeah, like I'm definitely when you think about your strategy kind of generally, and Ryan, you've talked about this, and I know we've talked about it on prior webinars, but especially during this critical period, having those, listen, with sponsor products, and we're talking about, conversion rate obviously being a big input in terms of when you want to essentially be more aggressive versus less aggressive. DSP is kind of filling that gap between these periods where essentially, as Ryan put it, kind of priming the pump for the future. Right, when we talk about, and I know we've gotten questions kind of around, unbranded versus branded search activity, you being able to at least get your brand out there in front of consumers prior to them doing those bit of discovery during the the key shopping days, that's immensely valuable. Again, consumers are coming in there, and when they do an unbranded search, it means they don't necessarily know what brand they want yet, and your ability to at least create some familiarity with them, again through DSP, makes a difference. And you're relying again on Amazon's data to place these based on buying and purchasing activity. So it kind of just makes those ads just work really well. And we've seen, I know, just at a high level, kind of a lot of clients see a lot of good success with that, kind of filling in those gaps there.
Absolutely. And as we think ahead again to Cyber Week and the rest of the holiday shopping season in front of us, a couple of things that I think all advertisers, sellers, vendors should be doing to prepare. We're always going to expect large volume increases, especially if your product or the category that you are selling in is very giftable. So if it's something that family is going to want to give to another family member or a friend, like definitely be prepared for large volume increases. And I would think about that both from an advertising volume perspective, but then make sure you've got the inventory and the supply ready to meet that demand. And Prime Day is probably a pretty good example of what you can expect in terms of daily volume around that time period and leading up to that time period. Making sure that you're able to fulfill that demand, I think, is critical. And then back to advertising, just making sure that you're ready to invest to enter Cyber Week through increased CPCs. So, we saw CPCs increase over Prime Day. They're going to increase as they always do as we enter Cyber Week, just making sure you're prepared to meet that increased demand, increased return, but also increased cost to compete for that demand.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, just getting to the private label aspect, I think, when you look at the data here, especially in the context of advertising, think about them as you would any other competitor, assuming that, again, you have a, let's say private label Amazon brand in your space. Treat them as a typical competitor, a well-funded one, as the case may be, but, don't think of them as something even outside your current competitive set, because really what you're seeing here is they're operating in at least fairly predictable ways, where the position that they're in, at least when it comes to SERP, from a week-to-week basis, stays relatively consistent. So obviously, know your competitive set, know what you're up against, but really, again, what the data is pointing to here is there's, they're operating kind of within a, traditional kind of means of, like, if they're buying a placement, they're probably buying that same placement over, consistently, and it's not like there's wild changes in their investment that you're seeing. So just keep that in mind, as you think about this. You don't have to be, you can be, concerned, but just as concerned as you would be about any kind of larger competitor that maybe you're up against.
They may be the most predictable competitor based on the data that you shared, Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about this, when you look at that increased activity we talked about, this is going to happen across marketplaces, right? We already saw, and there've been some articles talking about where you had obviously you had Chewy, Walmart, you had other retailers kind of doing sales right alongside Prime Day to try to steal some of that thunder. And guess what? All of them saw big increases. And in fact, I think there was an article today, I think it was eMarketer was being cited, that actually in terms of like a share of overall e-commerce traffic over the holiday, like, actually, like, in some cases, Walmart was like even outpacing that of Amazon in some cases, depending on their methodology. So understand where to place your bets. So whether you're live on Walmart now, I mean, they're going to be doing a freeze, I believe, starting either this month or early next month in terms of accepting new merchants. So if you're not on there, you may have lost your chance, but it definitely, hopefully you're already on there. And understand that, right, you can essentially place your bets, whether it's on Walmart, Amazon, other marketplaces, your own D2C site. Understand how to take advantage. What's going to be your best bet? And maybe this plays into the inventory conversation that Ryan talked about. Really, what's your setup at Amazon? How much can you invest before, if, let's say, the activity takes off, would that put you in a bad situation? If you're running low on inventory. So just understand what's out there. Where can you place your bets, and what avenues are available to you to kind of boost demand there. And kind of getting into that kind of competition. We talked about competition. We know it's going to be intense, right? CPCs are going up despite this rise in activity. Understanding how to bid to value and really having a system in place. Now, Teikametrics is one of them, but that can essentially react in real time to the changes taking place, even if you don't know they're happening. Like, that's really important, because when we talk about, right, Prime Day this year was a different day than obviously any of us expected. And we don't, we're making good guesses here, but in terms of how consumers behave from here all the way through Cyber Week and all the way through the end of the year, you're assuming that it's going to follow some kind of pattern that you saw last year, but even the intricacies within that, within your own category, et cetera, can be different. And you can't just rely, let's say, on just yourself or human to decide, okay, this is a good time to, we're going to ratchet up bids here. I mean, you need, if you're essentially, what our bidder does is, right, react based on changes either that we've seen previously with products like yours, or based on what we're seeing in terms of like conversion rate changes that are occurring, so that we can, before, let's say, your ACoS changes, which is a much more downstream, it takes longer for it to calculate. When we see conversion rates changing, we're going to be more aggressive, obviously within the constraints that you set. I mean, I'd encourage you, if you're more interested in kind of these dynamics, I'd check out, we posted on our blog just a couple weeks ago, kind of a detailed rundown of how our kind of updated bidding technology works in this respect, to kind of help you just more match that value. So definitely worthwhile taking a look at that. And again, maybe use us, but even if you don't, it's a good kind of strategic way to think about bidding generally. And kind of alongside that, obviously we're talking a lot about Cyber Week. So another Teika AI study This just dropped early this week. We looked actually at last Cyber Week on a category by category basis. So we looked across like conversion rate, lift, this type of thing. And there's a lot of great stuff in here in terms of what you can expect going into Cyber Week. So alongside some of this Prime Day data, and again, we'll be kind of coalescing this into a more downloadable format that you can kind of play around with in the coming week. But definitely check out this Cyber Week study as well. I think it can be a really good resource for you. And I'll send along a link to this in the replay as well. But otherwise, you can also just check it out at learn.teikametrics.com. So with that, I think we can get to some questions. So first, this is one from Will, just a quick one. Uses what is max? So that's maximum advertising cost of sale. So essentially, right, how much are you willing to spend on advertising to collect that sale? So that's an option within obviously our system, and other systems use it as well, to kind of say, I only want to spend X amount to get this sale, and that's how I'm going to essentially put a cap on where how aggressive my bid can get, again based on those parameters that you set. This is a question from Danielle, is when it comes to private label terms, are these brand and non-branded terms? And do you think this was affected? So we looked specifically across the top 1 million terms on Amazon. So this is going to be a mix of both brand and unbranded. I would say generally what we've seen, and this is across categories without fail, is unbranded terms are more popular. They show up more often in those popular spots than branded terms generally. So while you expect, right, definitely I'm sure like Amazon Echo as an example was probably a very popular term and was within that top million. Most of those terms where you're going to see them ranking, I mean, when you think about Amazon's private label, a lot of this stuff from a sheer number of products environment is concentrated a lot in clothing, shoes, and jewelry, like a lot of products in there from a sheer number. I mean, obviously their most high profile products are things like the Echo and the Fire Stick, but right, they've obviously expanded kind of their universe here. And in the case of those products, the ones outside of, again, the big brand names for Amazon, that's where they're ranking, right? They're trying to get people to find them on these unbranded terms. So that's likely, where you're going to see the vast majority of that activity. So just this is from Hunter. He says, so this was the discount amongst Amazon private label products. The average was 14%. He asked for the mode as well, i.e. what discount level was most common. I could look into that. However, what you did see was a pretty even distribution kind of across them. You saw a pretty wide variety, and that 14% is a pretty good indicator in terms of what's really where you saw a lot of changes happening. So let's look at this one. If you were one of the categories that saw a decrease in search volume, what would you suggest going forward for Cyber Week, Prime Day? I don't know, Ryan, would you want to take this one? Ryan, still with us? Well, I mean, I can tell you that generally, if you saw a decrease in search volume, I mean, from a category perspective, I would say really pay attention, I think, over the coming days to what specific terms are driving volume just in general, right, at all. What are the biggest terms, especially from an unbranded perspective? Because those are the ones that, again, when you think about consumers that are coming for shopping for holiday purposes, as one example, where you want to capture them, right, those folks that have essentially no brand affinity. They're coming in kind of from a blank slate. So this is something that we recommend typically when it comes to just a product launch, but it stands to reason that during one of these periods where you want to drive volume and you're willing to pay to get it, if you kind of take a small bucket of keywords that you want to focus on, and again, based on data that you see there is driving significant volume, significant conversion rates, focus in on those. Now that may mean that only certain certain aspects of your product catalog are really getting the most attention. But again, if you're seeing in aggregate kind of drops, this can be a way to kind of stem that tide a little bit and still drive pretty significant results. So, sorry, I'm just looking through these questions here. So someone asked, are you sending the presentation? Yes, we are. So you'll get, again, this presentation along with a recording of this call. So you'll see that come through. Again, that'll be coming through roughly on Monday. So just be prepared for that. And I'll send you some good links too for some of the stuff we've talked about here.
Andrew, just quick heads up, I'm back. I apologize.
Sure, no problem.
Lost my audio on the computer.
Okay.
I think there was a question you tried to pass me. I'm happy to answer it, or you may
I think we have another question. I think that's perfect for you, which was this is Raphael. He says, I've never used deals on Prime Day. I prefer to use the money for PPC. Do you think I'm leaving money on the table? I mean, can you talk about that, I guess, from like a high level maybe?
Yeah, so I mean, we manage search campaigns and DSP. So that's usually where we specialize and focus. That said, I see good performance from deals. I see good performance from promotions and also from coupons. So I think it's worth experimenting. Every category is going to perform different. Your product, even within a category, might perform differently with a promotion. So I can't tell you definitively that, yes, it's going to work great for you. But I'd say it's definitely worth trying it. And I would probably try it with a product that you're pretty confident is going to be successful with a promotion. So like, don't pick, your weakest product and hope that it's going to turn it into, a top selling item. Pick something that's probably in like the body or closer to the head of your catalog to try to experiment with. But generally we see good performance coming from promotions. And then I think coupling that with a solid search strategy is also really effective. I think a couple of extra details here. On Prime Day, a lot of the top search result page placements that would usually go to sponsored products were reserved strictly for Prime Day deals. So there was a box of, I believe, about 4 products when you searched for kind of like some of the most popular or common terms on Amazon that were just Prime Day deals. They didn't necessarily have a sponsored products placement in the top of the search results page. So just from that perspective, especially as we get close to other holiday events where Amazon's likely to drop in that type of placement again, it's definitely in your interest to be eligible to appear in those, even if you can't necessarily earn a sponsored spot at the top of that search results page. And the more that you're able to include like a coupon or a promotion in addition to or enhance your sponsored products placement by running both at the same time, you're just going to see higher engagement rates and higher conversion rates. So absolutely try it.
Yeah. And just to add to that, we did a study. This was last Prime Day back in 2019, and looked at, okay, amongst our customer base, let's look at products that discounted versus products that didn't discount. Now, everybody, just about, I think it was something like 93% of the products examined had revenue increases from, again, like the prior, I think, this study, we looked at the prior 4 Mondays and Tuesdays, because it was Monday, Tuesday last year was Prime Day. So we were kind of like the average Monday and Tuesday of the prior 4 weeks, and like 93% of products saw an increase in daily revenue as compared to those other 2-day periods. But when you broke this down by discounted versus non-discounted, again, both groups saw increases in revenue, but those discounted products saw significantly higher increases. So basically what this shows is like everyone, you're likely going to see an impact from Prime Day regardless. That's going to be a positive impact, but deals work, right? That generally you're going to be able to drive higher volume as Ryan said. Also, you might have access to these additional units that are very valuable placements that you wouldn't have access to if you weren't discounting. So that's worth keeping in mind, again, as we get closer to Cyber Week and all that type of stuff. So I think we can do maybe there's about one more question left, and then we can wrap this up a little early, give people another 15 minutes. So um, I think the last one here was and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think it may be worth reiterating is you know really interested in the theories behind the increase in conversion rate year over year. Can you share some speculation? This is from Andrew. And I know from, we talked about this a little bit. I think what we see is, right, was there some bleed over in terms of holiday shopping that kind of came into this Prime Day versus last Prime Day where you wouldn't have seen that in July. I think that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is I would say, one caveat with that data is we're looking kind of at two separate things. Like the 2019 was 2019 clients, 2020 was 2020 clients. So they're a little different in that sense. But still, when you see these overall increases, it makes the case that, right, and when you see this with the average order value, does it, that Ryan talked about, we're essentially folks behaving differently. And in that case, is it something where because there's, right now, you're going to have a sizable percentage of the population that are potentially nervous to go into a physical store, that if those folks, again, over the past, even if they were, let's say, maybe older, not as used to online shopping, now they've gotten used to it because they've had 6 months to do so, that those folks are flocking to these online retailers like Amazon more frequently, and essentially those behaviors kind of come to roost in terms of increased conversion rate. So, I mean, those are kind of some likely contributing factors to this. I don't know, Ryan, if you have anything to add beyond that.
Yeah, you could also make the argument that some of it might be related to the shift in ad composition on Amazon. And, we may be favoring ad types like sponsored brands video that may have different types of engagement rates, where after the user is engaged with the ad or clicked through the ad, they are more predisposed to convert. So, Amazon's also introducing new ad types. Those different ad types often have different conversion rates associated with them, and the distribution of activity on those ad types has changed over the last year. So it's probably a combination of all of these different things. I doubt there's one answer that drove all of this change. But yeah, I think holiday shopping is probably in there. Andrew, as you suggested, you've got a little bit of a COVID effect. And then I think you just have this artifact of the ad environment on Amazon changing a little bit as well over the last year.
Yeah, great point. Well, I think that'll wrap it up. Again, everyone here, you'll get a copy of both the slide deck along with a recording of the presentation and some links to some stuff we mentioned here. That'll be coming through on Monday. Additionally, we're going to be wrapping up a lot of the stuff we talked about and probably a few more tidbits into kind of more full-fledged report sometime next week. So just keep an eye out for that. And again, hope to see you all again soon. Have a great weekend.